Thought I'd start off with the bad news first. Essay deadline this Friday, 30th of December. Oh. I could have made it the 31st, or even the 1st of January, but I didn't. Right. Send it to me as an email attachment. You gave me yours, I think, didn't you? Right. I need a PDF of the PowerPoint. You should all know how to do a PDF of your PowerPoint because you've all done this in OpenOffice at some point in your university career, haven't you? Right. Oh dear. Right, on the 2nd of January, probably, obviously not on the 1st of January, I'll be going through the essays and choosing which ones will be presented next week. So I hope to get 6, probably about 9 altogether presented. So do check your email. And then the other piece of bad news, the final exam. You've already told me you can't make that date or time. I think you have as well, yeah. Send me another email just in case I mean, I know you can't make it, but just in case I lose the email, okay? Format the same as the midterm, and I'll circulate the topics next week. Any final exam, midterm makeups will be held sometime between the 19th and the 23rd. So there we are. So just to go back for the latecomers. Yeah, this Friday, right, okay. Okay, can you read that? Good, right. Final exam. Okay. Well, the first of today's classes, Missing in Action, is the title given in the book. I actually prefer the title, The Battle That Changed History. And this is the story of the Battle of the Teutoburger Forest, the Teutoburger Wald. And the story really begins with this man here, the Emperor Augustus, the first emperor of Rome. Some people think Julius Caesar was an emperor. He wasn't. This is the first emperor of Rome, Augustus, who introduced a new type of constitution for the Roman people in 28, 27 BC, under which he became the leader of the Roman Republic. Now, under Augustus, we find most of Europe coming under Roman control. Augustus was an expansionist emperor. He took Roman forces down into more or less the modern Sudan. He took them right up to the Euphrates, the border with the Parthian or Persian Empire. He took them right up to the rivers Rhine and Danube here. There was one part just outside the Roman Empire called Germania, Germania Magna, Greater Germany, Germania Inferior, which always created a bit of a problem. The thing was that the German tribes frequently crossed the river Rhine, crossed the river Danube, and raided Roman territory. So the Emperor Augustus decided that he was going to deal with this problem. And he established a series of legions, a legion, 5,000 men, along the river Rhine, and periodically would have a campaign into Germania to deal with the tribes there. In AD 6, it seemed to be decided on a final decisive campaign against the tribes of Germania. And he appointed as governor or leader of the armies along the Rhine a man called Publius Quinctilius Varus. He had been the governor of Syria, Roman Syria, more or less the same as the modern Republic of Syria. And Varus had won some pretty good victories there, so Augustus thought he was going to be the guy who could finally defeat the German tribes. Well, we know what happened next from a Roman historian called Tacitus. Tacitus tells us that in the year AD 9, Varus decided to take his army into Germania Magna for the big battle against the German tribes. He had an army of 3 Roman legions and support troops, roughly 20,000 soldiers. He marched into Germania with this army. Everybody was so confident he would win the battle. He was followed by another 10,000 or so, if not more, civilians. The women who lived with the soldiers, their children, traders, all sorts of people like that. Tacitus also tells us that Varus took with him as a military advisor a German prince called Arminius. Arminius had grown up at Rome. He spoke Latin perfectly. He trained as a Roman soldier, and he was now traveling with Varus, basically as the military advisor and the translator for Varus. What Varus didn't know, nobody knew, was that Arminius actually was a very ambitious person. Arminius had decided that he wanted to unite the German tribes into one army, and he would lead them in a war against the Romans and defeat the Romans so that Germania would never be threatened again. Well, Varus, of course, didn't know anything about this. Varus goes marching into Germania. He does what he sets out to do. He can't find any of the German armies. The separate German tribes have all gone off in different directions. So towards the end of the year, AD 9, he decides to make his way back to the River Rhine. At this point, Arminius says, well, I've heard there's a large group of Germans a little bit to the north of where we are. Why don't we go and deal with them? So Varus says, why not? And off he goes. Arminius sneaks away in the night, meets up with the German chiefs, and arranges an ambush. The Romans walk straight into an ambush. We're told by some of the survivors from what happened next that Varus had taken his army, 20,000 men, plus another 10,000 civilians, into an area known as the Teutoburger Saltus, the Teutoburger Forest. They had been marching through a very narrow area of land between a wood, a forest, and some mountains on one side, and a marsh, a peat bog on the other side. Suddenly, the Germans had attacked from the forest. The soldiers, marching in a very narrow area, about 100 meters wide, were unable to deal with the German attack. And essentially, to cut a long story short, almost all of the 20,000 Roman soldiers and the 10,000 or so civilians were killed by the Germans. Some of the Roman survivors managed to escape after being taken prisoner by the Germans. And they said, well, what the Germans did was they would identify the officers in the Roman army, and they would put them in a big cooking pot full of water and boil them alive until their skin came off. Other officers they nailed to trees and they used them for target practice. But essentially what had happened was an entire Roman army, 3 legions plus support troops, over 20,000 men, had all been killed in a single battle. This was the biggest defeat the Roman army had suffered for something like 200 years. We're told that when the news of the battle got back to Rome, Augustus nearly went mad. Augustus started banging his head against the wall like that and saying, "Quinctili vari legioni redit, give me back my legions, Varus." And there were no more of the legions left. Augustus decided that he had to punish the Germans somehow. And so for the next 10 years or so, several Roman armies went into Germania. They were never again able to meet up with all the German tribes at one place. They could punish one tribe, punish another tribe, but they never succeeded in defeating Arminius. Arminius, meanwhile, his plan had been to unite the German tribes and become their leader. Arminius was a very successful politician in the sense that he convinced the Germans that they could only defeat the Romans by fighting under one commander. But he wasn't successful enough to convince the German chiefs that he should be the king of all the tribes. And so after the Battle of the Teutoburger Forest, the Teutoburger Saltus, the tribes went their separate ways. Rome kept on punishing them, but the real thing was that the Romans never ever tried to conquer Germania again. Well, the story of Varus and his legions, the story of the Battle of the Teutoburger Veld, was one of those episodes that lives on in the lives of Roman historians, but doesn't really stretch outside Roman history. The implications of the battle are really quite important. But nobody really knew anything about the battle apart from what Tacitus had written. There was no evidence for where the battle had been, and things only began to change in the 17th century. This tombstone was found at a place called Xanten on the River Rhine. Xanten is just inside Germany from the border with Holland now. The tombstone records a man called Marcus Caelius. It gives you his name there. It tells you that he's a centurion, an officer in the 18th Legion, that he died at the age of 53 in the Battle of Varus, in the battle that Varus lost, the Battle of the Teutoburger Forest. And it goes on to say that if his body is ever found, may it be buried in this particular place. Well, the discovery of this tombstone started to get people interested in the story of the Teutoburger Forest. It also started off, in a sense, a kind of pan-German nationalism. What you have to be aware of is that until 1871, there was no Germany. There was a Prussia, a Württemberg, a Bayern, a Swabia, and lots of other states that all spoke German, but there was no actual unified Germany. In the 19th century, of course, these separate states are under a great threat from their next-door neighbour, France, under Napoleon. Napoleon fights and defeats the German states because they're fighting separately. German pan-nationalists used that tombstone to try and generate an idea of a unified Germany. So we start to see romantic paintings like this appearing, showing Arminius there, beautiful little pink cheeks, suddenly, hello, I'm Arminius. There's the Roman legions being killed in the background, the weapons and armour of the Roman general Varus being placed there. The idea of Arminius becomes a symbol of national unity. German pan-nationalists made the point, instead of being separate kingdoms and states, why don't we form one country? We will be as powerful as France. We can defeat Napoleon. Well, the ideas seemed quite good and seemed to work to a certain extent, but then the British, with the help of a Prussian army, defeated Napoleon, and the idea kind of disappeared again for a while. But still, this idea of Arminius and the way the united German tribes had defeated the Romans remained a popular thing in German history. Well, the histories of the separate German states. And so we keep on seeing repeated throughout the 19th century more and more idealized romantic paintings like this. There's Arminius, the Germans fighting the Romans down there. The only thing was, though, although the Battle of the Teutoburger Veld had become a symbol of pan-nationalism for Germans, nobody quite knew where it was. If you want to have a symbol of a unified state, something that everybody can unite under, especially if it's a battle, you need to know where it is. And this is where I always come to my favourite question in this class. Does anybody know where the Battle of Sakarya was? Palatla? I'm always amazed when I take my students to the archaeological site at Gordion, which is right in the middle of the battlefield, and people don't know that that's the battlefield where the Greeks were turned back. Wow, think of that. Symbol of national unity. But for Germans, for the different German states in the 19th century, the Battle of the Saltes Teutoburgiensis, the Battle of the Teutoburger Wald, became a rallying point, a symbol for what Germans can do if they unite. So what we find happening is various discussions taking place in the early 19th century. Tacitus gives one little clue. It says it's not very far away from a river called the Lippe, from the upper Lippe area, so it had to be somewhere in that general area. Various different German commissions get together and they eventually decide that it had to be at a place called Detmold, not far from this place here, Bielefeld. And in the 1830s, German pan-nationalists get the money together to start building this, the Hermannsdenkmal. Arminius is the Latin version of Hermann. Denkmal is monument. Work starts on building this monument in 1838. The idea was it's going to be 26 meters high stone base, a 26 meter high bronze statue on the top. But people basically lost interest in building it. There was still no unified Germany. The statue, in fact, wasn't to be completed until another 40 years or so later. Finally, the German states, when they realized that France was threatening to invade them again in 1869, the German states formed a confederation under Prussia, Kaiser Wilhelm I, defeated the French in the Franco-Prussian War of 1870-1871, and finished off the Hermann statue to symbolize this victory over the French, the unity of Germany. See, the statue's got a double meaning. The Germans under Arminius had been fighting the Romans. The Germans under Wilhelm I were fighting the French. Germans always spoke German. The French had been conquered by the Romans, which is why the French spoke a Latin-based language. But we free Germans had never been conquered by the Romans, which is why we speak a completely different language. So it has a couple, kind of double symbolism in that particular sense. So the statue itself, the Hermannsdenkmal, was finished at Detmold in 1875 or so. Arminius becomes the sort of great hero of the united German people. The local football club in Bielefeld becomes the Arminia Football Club, and there you see them in their football colours with a German helmet on the top as well. The only problem was that usual simple one: politicians had decided on something without consulting archaeologists or historians. And the greatest classical historian of all time, Theodor Mommsen, pointed out that where the statue of the Hermannsdenkmal was couldn't possibly be where the battle had taken place. Oh, why is that? Why is that? Well, says Mommsen, there is no archaeological evidence for a battle here at all. There is, however, archaeological evidence for a big battle at the time of Augustus near a place called Kalkriese. There's a field there called Goldacker, the gold field. That's probably where the battle took place. Oh no, all the politicians say. We've built the statue, we know where the battle was, this is our symbol of a united Germany, a victorious Germany here at Detmold. Mommsen, you don't know what you're talking about. Well, that's how the situation remained for the next almost 120 years. Kalkriese, up here, was where Mommsen suggested the battle had taken place. Detmold, down here, is where the big monument was. Detmold remains the symbol of the battle until archaeologists start to look around the site of Kalkriese. And strangely enough, it wasn't actually a German archaeologist who did this work. It was a British archaeologist. or rather a British Army officer called Major Tony Clun. He began to search the area of Kalkriese in 1987 to see if he could find any evidence for the battle actually taking place there. He got permission from the landowner to search this field called the Goldacker Field, the place where Mommsen said the battle had probably taken place. Goldacker, the gold field. He starts walking over this with a metal detector, and on the first day he finds something like 163 gold and silver coins and bronze coins of the Emperor Augustus. All these gold and silver coins, Emperor Augustus, well, they could have been made as late as AD 14. But mixed up with the coins were a few like this with the letters V-A-R stamped on them. This is a coin issued by Varus. Varus, who had taken the army into Germany and had been defeated at the Battle of the Teutoburger Wald. Well, when you find a large number of coins like this, and also a few like this, you start thinking, is this really the battlefield? No, the German archaeologists said. It's got to be somewhere near the Hermann's Denkmal statue, which is about 50 kilometers away. You've got the wrong site. But Tony Clun kept on searching with his metal detector, and he started to find things like these. Pieces of lead, about that big, slightly smaller than an egg. They're slingshots. They're the type of things that were used in warfare by the Romans for throwing stones against the enemy. A classic Roman weapon. Tony Clun then found a piece of silver with a face on it. It's only that big, but he recognized what it was. It's a falera. A falera is a Roman medal. On the right there you see the same tombstone we were looking at earlier, repainted as it would have looked originally, and you can see he's got his medals on the front, just like that one there. Then the most significant find in many ways, this piece of iron shaped like a face, covered with silver. It's a face mask from a Roman cavalryman's helmet. With all this evidence coming together, basically everything pointed to Kalkriese, the Goldacker field site, actually being the site of the battle that changed the course of history. It was decided to do a proper survey of the site. Now remember, last week I was talking about the Custer Battlefield Survey and how they were able to reconstruct what had actually happened using metal detectors and archaeology. Well, they did the same thing with the Kalkriese site. They went around with metal detectors. They carefully recorded the site of every time a metal detector went ding, and put an arrow in there. They would map everything. Then they would dig everything up and see what they found where. The analysis of the metal detection finds revealed a very surprising picture. Basically, there was something like a 2.5 kilometer long concentration from the Goldacker field going towards the west of various finds of Roman equipment, coins and things like that. I'll show you some in a moment. Then you can see how the finds, the spread of the finds splits out like that at the end. Analysis, soil analysis, then took place and demonstrated that this field area on the north side of where all these finds were being made had originally been a peat bog. On the south, you have a mountain which still has trees on it. Excavation then started taking place. And the excavations revealed the remains, of very surprising remains, of an earth rampart along the south side of the site, the side from which the Germans had attacked. That was what we were told by the survivors. This was evidently originally a 2-meter high earth wall with wooden stakes along the top to provide protection for the Germans. The Germans waiting in ambush for the Roman army under Varus to come in. Originally, this would have been just within the forest. We can do soil tests, we can actually work out what the landscape would have been like. So originally, the Romans would have walked along this path, they would not have seen that earth rampart at all. Further excavation revealed that the rampart was not continuous. The earth wall had several gaps in it, gateways. Well, the description given by the survivors was that Varus had marched into this very narrow area between a forest and a hill and a bog, a peat bog, only about 100 or so metres wide, 200 metres wide at the widest part. The army had got all the way inside here. Now, a marching army, we're talking about 3 kilometres long, 20,000 soldiers. It's about 3 kilometres, possibly even 5. And then the front of the army had been attacked by the Germans, and then suddenly the Germans attacked from the side. The Roman soldiers are trained to fight in a fixed battle. Roman soldiers are not trained to deal with a surprise attack. The Romans found themselves stuck between Germans coming in from the south. They couldn't escape to the north because of the bog, and basically they were all cut down to pieces one by one. This 3D map gives you a slightly better idea of what actually happened. Here you've got the rampart, the German rampart, behind the tree line so that the Romans couldn't see it. The Romans are forced to march in a very narrow area. They can't escape to the north because of the bog over there. An overview basically showing you what had happened. The yellow line marking where the Roman army had marched, the black line and the red attack arrows being where the Germans had come from. Well, that whole field, the Goldacker field, that whole length of territory, 2.5, 3 kilometres long, proved to be full of various bits of Roman armour. For example, these bronze hooks, they're about 7 centimetres or so long. These are chainmail fasteners, the sort of thing that tied together the parts for chainmail armour. There were other bits of Roman armour that were found, like this. This is a breastplate, that part there, from a type of armour known as a lorica segmentata. This was the most amazing discovery of the whole excavation. Why? Well, the lorica segmentata is shown on things like Trajan's column. It's the type of Roman armour you always imagine Roman soldiers wearing. But it was always believed that this type of Roman armour wasn't developed until about AD 50. But here we have, at the Calcresa battlefield site, and one piece of one of these armours, so it must have been invented at a much earlier date. There were large numbers of Roman spearheads of different types found scattered. They'd just been left there after the Romans had been defeated. The Germans hadn't bothered taking them away, they just left them on the site. So you have different parts of spearheads here, the one at the end very badly damaged, it must have been used in battle. Parts from what we call a pilum, a special type of Roman spear. It's designed to be thrown for a distance of about 50 metres, and the idea is that the head bends when it hits somebody's shield, so they can't take it out and pull it back and throw it back. Roman military axes, tent pegs, everything belonging to a Roman army on the march. A Roman army cut down in battle. Edges of Roman shields there, a shield boss like that, which would have covered the hand originally. Roman army belt buckles, very characteristic types like this. And even the preserved soles from Roman military sandals. Roman military sandals have got iron nails in them. And although the leather has decayed, the iron nails remain in place. And you can see how they managed to excavate this particular area here, and you can see the pattern of the shoes that were left on the ground, probably still on the feet of the soldiers who died there. There were cheap pieces from Roman legionary helmets, all sorts of bits and pieces. Over 2,000, 3,000 separate finds. The whole range of equipment that you would expect to find with the Roman army. And, of course, the bodies. We're told by Tacitus that about 10 years after the battle, Roman soldiers made their way back to the battle site. We're told by Tacitus that the general ordered all the bodies to be collected together and buried underneath a tumulus. Well, there's no tumulus there, so Tacitus got that wrong. But what they did find during the excavation were several pits which had been dug into the ground, and bits and pieces of bodies have been thrown in. Well, the skeletons, of course, have been lying around for about 10 years, so all the bones have become disarticulated. So you have a skull fragment there with the upper jaw, but not the lower jaw. You've got a long bone here, you've got parts of the backbone there. This is another pit, very similar, again with the large piece of the skull. Good set of teeth on that particular guy there. But notice, nothing left of the face. The face bones have all gone. Because these Germans suffered pretty badly at the hands, these Romans suffered very badly at the hands of the Germans. Can you just see that? A sword blow is taken off one side of the face and all the top part of the jaw there. You know, you think of battle and you see it on TV and it doesn't look that nasty. Well, this is what actually happened. A sword blow across the front of the skull like that, twisted so the bottom part of the brow has come out. And the same sort of thing that's happened here. You can see there's been one cut there, another big slice and cut right through that's cut down to the eye. Other cases like this, again you can see how the whole side of the skull has been smashed in, probably after death, probably not causing death, but evidence of just how fierce the whole battle was. And there were several bits and pieces like this, where you just get half a skull, one half missing. That bit, well, he may have survived that slice over the top of his head. You'd be surprised what you can survive from. But he didn't survive that bit there, and the same sort of thing up there. Evidence of the ferocity of the battle. But there was also not just human skeletons, skeletons of the animals that had been with the Romans. So, for example, here, a donkey skeleton, which was found. They're in the process of lifting it, so it's got plaster of Paris over it just there. Well, now we know where the Battle of the Teutoburg of old was, or we think we do. It's now become a popular weekend entertainment. And if you're in that part of Germany during the summer, every month or so, they recreate the battle like this. And here you see the Romans actually sort of charging up against the Germans on their rampart at the top there. You know, some people like to do this type of thing. You can see he's the centurion. He's got his phalaera there as well. And here you see the poor old Romans trying to fight the Germans, but they can't get at the Germans at all because of the rampart. Well, the archaeological evidence of the excavation at this site confirms what the few survivors said about the battle. That basically they'd walked into this trap. The Germans had united, formed up behind a rampart on one side, and as soon as the Roman army got into this narrow gap, even though the Roman soldiers are very well defended with armour, wonderful weapons, simple German soldiers with no armour, tribal chieftain, were able to defeat them all. 20,000 soldiers, 10,000 civilians. We don't know exactly how many people survived the battle. We do know that some Roman soldiers were taken prisoner and they became slaves of the Germans, and they were eventually rescued 30 years after the battle took place. But generally speaking, we're talking about 20,000 people being lost here. So the distribution of the finds and the archaeological evidence confirms what had happened. Varus, kind of like Custer in a way, had walked straight into an ambush. Well, he trusted Arminius too much, unfortunately. He didn't know that Arminius was playing a double game. But the survivors of the battle talk about how, towards the end of the day, they managed to break out into the open countryside. But they were so scattered that they couldn't form up to form a proper defense again. And so they were slowly cut down and killed off as they went off in two different directions, which is exactly what you see here. So, this was one of the greatest defeats the Roman army ever suffered, the first big defeat in over 200 years. The 3 legions that took part in this battle, their numbers were never used again. Their numbers were unlucky numbers. This battle was the battle that nearly made Augustus go completely mad. But more interestingly in many ways to me is that although some of the Roman soldiers escaped from here, although the Romans came back afterwards and attacked the Germans time and time again after this particular defeat, the decision was made by the Romans never to invade, to occupy Germania. It could have been done because the German tribes had not united. Now think what would have happened if the Romans had done that. The Romans invaded Gaul, France. French is a Latin-based language. The Romans invaded, conquered Spain. Spanish is a Latin-based language. The Romans invaded and conquered Romania. Romania is a Latin-based language. Well, we wouldn't be speaking in English as a common language. English is a developed form of the German that was spoken by the Germans who defeated the Romans at the Battle of Teutoburger Wall. They took their language to England, gave England the place name England, gave us the English language. So instead of speaking English, we'd be speaking some kind of language that wouldn't quite be French or Spanish or Romanian or Portuguese. It really was a battle that changed history. Okay, we'll stop there. What time is it? Oh, lots of time, right, because now is the favourite revenge time.